Welcome to the first ever installment of Drinking and Drafting. This is a return to Ravnica 6-man draft that took place on Wednesday, November 7th, 2012. Alright, so we open pack 1. Right away you can see a Chorus of Might, Electricity. I immediately go to the back, drop the land, and see an Ash Zealot. 2/2 first strike, haste. Got a Zorius, or the Selesnya Key Rune. Got a Lobber Crew, a Doorkeeper, a Drudge Beetle, Sewer Shambler. At this point, I've got a lot of really decent creatures. No great removal, but obviously I'm leaning towards the Ash Zealot. It's got such great value for a 2 cost, and it's rare. We do rare redraft in this group, which means at the end we draft rares based on your placement, so that takes into effect as well. This pack, Rootborn Defenses, Spawn of Rixmati, Frostburn Weird, Splatter Thug. Really great pack overall. Tower Drake, forget his name, but the 3/1 Vigilance, and got the Overgrown Tomb, which is a fantastic one of the new dual lands, which is worth about 15 bucks. So I'm considering that, but the fact that we rare redraft means that unless it has any relevance in my deck, that I probably shouldn't pick it. So I look at Splatter Thug, pretty awesome. He's a 2/2 first strike for 3 that you can unleash to make him a 3/3 first striker instead, and he's just extremely valuable, so I go ahead and run him.
Been drinking and drafting.
The next pack, got some okay cards, some Mana Fixing, an Ogre Jailbreaker, Spirius Skywatch, the Rakdos Key-Rune, and Azorius Charm. I would probably have gone with the Azorius Charm if I had any of those color cards yet, but since I've already got some in Rakdos, I go ahead and take the Rakdos Key-Runes. It's one of my favorite Key-Runes just because it becomes a 3/1 first striker, but it also helps you accelerate and that sort of thing. In this pack, Grim Roustabout, got an Izzet Charm. Izzet Charm is pretty useful. Survey the Wreckage, Inspiration, Golgari Charm. 2 charms in 1 pack is pretty interesting. Essence Backlash, the Scorpion. I'm leaning towards the Grim Roustabout. The Izzet Charm, just like the Azorius Charm, has quite a bit of value in most decks, but I don't have any blue yet, and ultimately I decided to go with the Grim Roustabout, a 1/1 who can regenerate and has Unleash, which fits the Rakdos theme anyways. In this pack, got Paralyzing Grasp, Ethereal Armor, Grizzly Salvage, the Rakdos Shred Freak, Towering Indrik, the Goblin Rally, Arrest. Got some really decent cards, actually. Obviously, I'm floating towards red and black at this point. I've just got such a strong... I'm getting a good amount of decent cards in those colors. So I'm leaning towards the Rakdos Shred Freak, but I'm trying to think if I want to splash blue, because at this point I haven't really seen any removal, at least in red or black. But I decided to go for that Rakdos Shred Freak. So at this point, this deck's seeming pretty fast. Again, I'm trying to look, got cards like Dynacharge and Goblin Electromancer, Cobble Brute, a flyer and a couple of green cards. I'm trying to think about maybe splashing blue, which is why I end up going with the Goblin Electromancer. It's kind of easy, depending on the cards or removal, to splash into blue from Rakdos. So I go ahead and put that down. And in case, the black dries up, I can always go just straight Izzet and use all the red that I have. Right off the bat, see Electricity, Paralyzing Grasp, Chorus of Might, the Viashino Racketeer. I'm leaning Sewer Shambler and Drudge Beetle. Obviously, the red and black cards are the ones that are interesting me the most, and red's not really drying up. Electrickery, depending on your opponent, can really just sweep the board, so I decided to go with that. You can always side it out for other cards, but it can be some pretty decent removal, especially for its overload cost, if they have low toughness flyers, for example. Rogue's Passage, Axebang Stag, Catacomb Slug, Destroy the Evidence, Frostburn Weird, and Rootborn Defenses. Frostburn Weird, although it's not quite as aggro as Rakdos, is a great answer in some games where I really need to throttle it back late game, because he can be just as aggro as I need him to be if I've got the mana. This pack got an Ogre Jailbreaker, a Bellows Lizard, Grizzly Salvage, another Azorius Charm. Just because of my colors, I decided to go with the Ogre Jailbreaker. He's actually playable. I typically won't play Bellows Lizard in any deck. Here you can see I'm kind of filing through. I was thinking about taking an Azorius Charm just because I need some for my standard deck. I ended up going with the Ogre Jailbreaker because I realized I could, they're not an expensive card, so I could trade them from one of my friends that I draft with. This pack, Golgari Charm, Trained, Nakatl, really some bad cards, so I just go for the Charm, even though I won't use it most likely in the deck. They're almost $1 card. Fairly useful. Paralyzing Grasp, Towering Indrik, Grizzly Salvage. I go with a Paralyzing Grasp, again, kind of my earlier point, in case I decide to splash some blue for control or removal. This pack got Dynacharge, Downsize. I end up going with Downsize, just it can actually be a fairly aggro card or a way of removing creatures when you play an aggro deck like Rakdos. And then this, a Viashina Racketeer, and then a Catacomb Slug, one of my least favorite creatures in black. And that takes us to pack 2. At this point, I'm playing mostly red with some black and some blue that I'm still not sure I'm going to play. Get rid of the land card and the add card. The rare in this pack is Collective Blessing, which is a pretty powerful card, but doesn't exactly match my colors. So I'm looking, I've got a Void Wielder, the Rakdos Guildgate, Drudge Beetle, Inaction Injunction, Spawn of Rixmati. Launch Party is really looking sweet right now just because of the low amount of removal. So it's really between Void Wielder, Rakdos Guildgate, Spawn of Rixmati, and Launch Party. I decided to go with the Launch Party. It's just, it's quite useful for removal, and especially in Rakdos with the low-powered creatures that they're about to kill anyways. It's a way to really turn down that clock because you're trying to race them to 0 anyways. This next pack, a Bellows Lizard, Grizzly Salvage, Frostburn Weird, Void Wielder, Ogre Jailbreaker, a Hellhole Flailer, which really piques my interest, the Izzet Staticaster, a Blood Crypt, and a foil 10-mint Crasher. The Blood Crypt's pretty awesome. It's in my colors. I like his Ecstatic Caster, and then Hellhole Flailer can actually end games. It's a decently costed. It's a 3/2 for 3 that can turn into a 4/3 for 3. And then if you need that last little bit of damage, you use 4 mana to throw it at them directly. So I end up going with the Hellhole Flailer, just because, like I said, it's actually won me games, and even aside from his last ability, he's just a decent creature that kind of fits the Rakdos theme. On this pack, you see the Giant Zombie Worm, another Coruscamite, and Electrickery, Paralyzing Grasp, Augur Spree, which really catches my eye, another Rakdos Key Rune, Thrill Kill Assassin, the Rakdos Cackler. This pack's pretty strong and has a lot of good cards for the Rakdos archetype. Really, most of the options here you really couldn't go wrong with. I'm leaning towards Augur Spree just because I need some decent removal, so I go ahead and take that. And I'm hoping one of those cards wheels. In this pack, Risen Sanctuary, which is a beast. Dread Reveler, Stealer of Secrets, another Splatter Thug, and Dispel. Splatter Thug is Splatter Thug and Dread Reveler, pretty awesome. I go ahead and try to double up on my Splatter Thug plan. This pack, another pack that really doesn't have anything extremely interesting. Trishani's Judgment would have been nice. Obviously, I'm far out of red at this point, but I go ahead and take the Rakdos Shred Freak. Really fast creature, not my favorite. The 1 toughness can get in the way sometimes, but it's decent. This pack have another downsize, the Crocodile there with lifelink, Selesnia's Sentry. I'm mainly basically trying to figure out if I'm going to end up hate drafting one of those cards. I look at Rakdos Rage Mutt, which is pretty awesome, and then Traitorous Instinct. I end up going with the Rage Mutt. Solid, he's a 3/3 lifelink haste for 5. He fits my theme and can really turn a game around if I'm losing life or if they're ahead of me on board state. It helps swing it in my direction. This pack, the Collective Blessing, actually wheeled. Got the Rakdos Guildgate and Action Injunction, Spawn of Rixmati, Void Wielder. Those are the main things I'm looking at. Spawn of Rixmati obviously fits the Rakdos theme. He's a 5/3 for 5. You can unleash to make him a 6/4 that can't block, so I end up going his route. That's mainly useful if it's a if it's a race that you're trying to win and you don't need a blocker. This pack, see the foil Tenement Crasher, Bella's Lizard, Ogre Jailbreaker, Grizzly Salvage. I end up going with the foil Tenement Crasher. He's a good finisher, a good late game, and he has haste. He's a 5/2 haste for 6. It's pretty decent. This pack, another Elic Trickery, Course of Might, a Rakdos Keyrune, and the Terrace Worm. I end up going for my second Rakdos Keyrune. Like I said, he's one of my favorites, at least from a creature perspective, and fits my colors, helps out with acceleration, that sort of thing. This pack is fairly uninteresting, at least in my colors. I go ahead and take the Risen Sanctuary just because I don't like playing against it. An 8/8 is pretty hard to deal with outside of removal. Survey the Wreckage, another Tenement Crasher, and then 2 cards I won't play, so I go ahead and take the second Tenement Crasher. Selesnia's Sentry is what I end up leaning towards in this pack. It's just the card out of those 3 that I want to play the least. He's a pretty annoying creature in the right deck. Here, a Void Wielder and another Selesnya. I'm take the Void Wielder in case I play it, and then last pick is an Ogre Jailbreaker. Here we're on to the third pack. Go back to the take out the land and token. Got a foil, and the rare is Chaos Imps. I'm pretty sure I'm going to take it at this point, but I go ahead and look through in case there's anything else interesting. Spawn of Rixmati, Cremate, Explosive Impact, which is very solid. Daggerdome Imp, the Izzet Keyrune. At this point, I'm hoping the Explosive Impact wheels. But I'm pretty sure, and like I said, I end up taking the Chaos Imps. He's a finisher. He's great against, Rakdos is one of Rakdos' main weaknesses, flyers, and obviously he helps block, their big flyers. This pack, Vassal Soul, got a couple of dual lands. Got the Dread Reveler, the Annihilating Fire, and some other cards that aren't really interesting. Annihilating Fire makes the most sense at this point. It's damage, it's removal, it's whatever you need it to be. And its exile line is great against Golgari. This pack, Rakdos Shred Freak. I think this will be my 3rd at this point. Again, just such a fast card. Grim Roustabout, obviously. Archweaver, Towering Indrik, some stuff, again, not in my colors, Giant Growth. Green and white seem to be pretty open. So I go ahead and take the Grim Roustabout instead of the Rakdos Shred Freak. Again, it being a common, I'll probably see more, and it'll probably wheel. Transguild Promenade, Call to Rescue, Mind Rot, Cellar of Songbirds, Void Wielder, Gatecreeper Vine, Cyclonic Rift, which is a pretty awesome card. It did me a lot of work during the pre-release, and because I'm considering splashing blue, I go ahead and take it. The red and black cards in this, aren't very interesting, and so even though it doesn't meet the Rakdos archetype directly, it can tend to be useful, and so I go ahead and take it. This pack got Slime Molding, a couple of green and blue, another Dramatic Rescue, Rakdos Shred Freak, Stone Fair Crocodile, I think it's called, an Action Injunction. It's pretty obvious I'm going to take the Rakdos Shred Freak. I think actually this might be my third one, but he's a pretty easy fit for my deck. This pack looks pretty similar, but Grizzly Salvage and Firemind's Foresight. Other than that, the pack is almost identical to the pack I just took. So at this point, I'm looking at the the blue and or black that are in there, and just take the Inaction Injunction. I'm not sure if I'm going to go blue, but if I do, it's a pretty decent card, and it's fairly aggro as well. Explosive Impact comes up right off the pack. Dagger Drone Imp, Spawn of Rix Mahdi, and Explosive Impact is a finisher. It's a Lava Axe that's an instant, and you can target creatures, so it's removal. It's pretty decent, even if high costed. It's really good and limited. This pack, Stealer's Secrets, Codex Shredder, Dispel, Rootborn Defenses, nothing real, amazing. Got the Selesnya Dual Land. I go ahead and take the Rootborn Defenses just to hate draft, as I don't like playing against that card. Archweaver, another Rakdos Shred Freak, another Rootborn Defenses. I go ahead and take the Shred Freak. Dramatic Rescue, got a Foil Forest, Dispel, Mind Rot, and Void Wielder. So it's between the Void Wielder and Mind Rot. Mind Rot is good. I usually don't play more than one, but it's great during certain times of a game, and so I go ahead and take that. In this pack, I'm just trying to think of what I want to play against the least, so I take a Dramatic Rescue. It's fairly annoying against my deck. Grizzly Salvage is what I end up taking. Again, it's probably the most powerful against, and then Selesnya Sentry, and then Life Gain. So that brings me to my deck, which you can see in the one slot I have Electrickery. In the two slot I've got 2 Grim Roustabouts, 4 Rakdos Shred Freaks, an Ash Zealot, and a Frostburn Weird. Got 2 Rakdos Kree Runes, an Augur Spree, Hellhole Flailer, the Viashino Racketeer, the Splatter Thugs. I got 2 of those. Annihilating Fire. Got 1 copy of Launch Party, a Spawn of Rix Mahdi, Rakdos Ragemunt, Chaos Imps, and an Explosive Impact. So that starts the first game. We roll to see who goes first, and Michael wins. I decide to keep my hand. Michael decides to mulligan down to 6. He didn't like the land that was in his hand, didn't match up with the cards, he says, which is understandable. So I cut the deck. And I like my hand. I've got some fairly low cost cards. I've got a couple of lands. I'm pretty well set for that. Michael checks his hand, and he decides to go. And so he plays the Rakdos Guildgate and says go. I play a mountain and pass back the turn. Michael plays a mountain, then plays out the Rakdos Guildmage. I forget the name right offhand, but he's pretty interesting. At this point, I know that Michael and I are at least dipping into some of the same level of cards. I go ahead and play a Swamp, and then play a Grim Roustabout. And I decide I do want to unleash it. so it makes him a 2/2. He still has regenerate, but he cannot block. And now it's Michael's turn. He plays a Blood Crypt, does not pay the life, so that it comes into play tapped, and he attacks me for 2, taking me down to 18. As you can see, Michael's enjoying a Miller High Life for the evening. And he decides to pay 2 more to use the Guild Mage's ability to deal, or actually cause me to lose 1 more life, taking me to 17. I then untap, draw a land, go ahead and play a second mountain. I then pay 2 for the Ash Zealot, the 2/2 first strike haste, and swing in with both, taking Michael down to 16 and passing the turn back to him. Michael plays a forest. He swings with the Guild Mage, dealing me 2. At first he thinks he's going to pay 2 to make me to do 1 more life, but takes it back instead and plays a Sluiceway Scorpion, passing back the turn. So the score at this point, 15 to 16. I play another land. I then have a couple of options. I have Mind Rot, Electrickery, the Rakdos Rage Mutt, and a Rakdos Shred Freak, which I actually just drew. But I go ahead and swing in with both, taking Michael down to 12 as he decides not to block. I then go ahead and play a Mind Rot, causing him to discard 2 cards. He's got 3 cards in his hand at this point, causing him to discard a Giant Growth and a Scavenge creature, passing the turn back to him. Michael goes ahead and swings in with his Guild Mage and pays 2 more to make it 3 life loss total, taking me to 12, and he passes back the turn. Draw a swamp. Go ahead and play a swamp. Then go ahead and pay 5 for the Rakdos Rage Mutt and swing in for the team. He decides to block with the Scorpion for the Rage Mutt, and ultimate price on the Ash Zealot, killing it. So he takes a total of 2 damage, and I gain 3, and a bunch of creatures die. So I pass back the turn. He goes ahead and pays 3 to scavenge the Scorpion onto his Guild Mage, and swings at me, taking me down to 11. I draw and play another swamp. I then pay 2 for the Rakdos Shred Freak and swing in with both, taking him down to 6. Then pass the turn. He draws another land. As you can see, he's got a nice barrage of lands there. And he pays 3 for Sewer Shambler, a 2/1 Swamp Walk that has Scavenge. Then swings at me for 4, taking me down to 7, and then he pays 2 more to make it 1 more and takes me down to 6. He then passes the turn back to me. I draw into an Annihilating Fire, and this is where I swing in with both the Grim Roustabout and the Rakdos Shred Freak. He decides to trade with the Shred Freak and takes him down to 4. I actually made a play mistake here, which you'll see in a minute. I essentially thought that I had enough mana to cast both of the spells I needed to in my hand to not lose this turn, but unfortunately I misplayed. Michael plays a Slitherhead and pays 3 to scavenge his Sluiceway Scorpion onto his Guild Mage, making it a 6/6, and I'm at 6 life, and he swings in for the win. Unfortunately, as I said, I had an Electrickery and an Annihilating Fire, but Michael wins game 1, taking us into the second game. So I choose to go first during game 2. Go ahead and draw out 7 cards to see if they're to my satisfaction. Looks pretty good. Grim Roustabout, got a Rakdos Keyrune, Ash Zealot, and 3 lands, so it's pretty good. Michael decides to keep as well. I play a Mountain and pass. He plays a Swamp and plays Slitherhead and passes. I draw a Chaos Imps, not bad, because I know something to look forward to. Play another Mountain, play Ash Zealot, and swing for 2. Michael doesn't block and goes down to 18. Pass back to him. He draws a Golgari Guildgate. Comes into play tapped. He plays another Slitherhead, slings at me for 1. I go to 19. He then passes me the turn. I draw into a Swamp. Go ahead and play a Swamp. And at this point, it's, Mind Rot, Keyrune, or Grim Roustabout. I go ahead and swing at him for another 2, taking him to 16. I then pay 3 for the Rakdos, Keyrune, and pass back the turn. Michael plays the Rakdos Guildgate. He then pays 2 for the 3/1 Vigilance guy and swings at me for 1, taking me down to 18. It passes back the turn. I draw a Frostborn Weird, drop a land, swing with the Ash Zealot. He decides to block with a Slitherhead, putting it in his graveyard. I then pay 2 for a Frostborn Weird, and pay 3 for a Mind Rot. He discards a Crocodile and I think a Sewer Shambler. Michael plays a Forest. He then pays 3 to scavenge the Sewer Shambler onto his Vigilance guy, so he's now a 5/3 with Vigilance. He then swings at me, taking me down to 13. He forgot to scavenge the other Slitherhead, so he's now a 6/4. He just forgot to do it before combat, missing a point of damage. So I play a Swamp. I then pay 5 and use 1 extra from the Keyrune to play Chaos Imps, and I do unleash it. So it's now a 7/6 flying trample, can't block. I then pass back the turn. Michael attacks with the Vigilance guy, and I just chump with my Frostborn Weird, and he passes back the turn. I draw a Splatter Thug. Swing in with my flying 7/6, taking Michael down to 9. I then pay 2 for my Grim Roustabout, no Unleash, and pass the turn to him. Leaving mana up to regenerate in case he has a really good plan to swing in and hit me for it. He swings in with his Slitherhead and the Vigilance. I ask him just to confirm. I then, kind of weigh up my options because I could block with the Ash Zealot, but basically I don't want the Slitherhead to grow any of his creatures. So I tell him I block with the Grim Roustabout and regenerate. He then uses a Giant Growth so that I take 4, takes me down to 9. I forget to tap the Grim Roustabout from regenerate, but no biggie. He passes back the turn. I play a Mountain and swing in with just the Chaos Imps, taking him down to 2 as he has no responses to flyers. I then pay 3 for my Splatter Thug and no Unleash, again as an excellent blocker in case he has something up his sleeve. He then draws, realizes he has nothing, and concedes the game. So I won game 2. So that takes us to game 3. Draw out cards, see if we're both happy with our hands. I pick up my 7, and Grim Roustabout, Annihilating Fire, Launch Party, Rakdos, Rage Mutt, and a few lands. I'm pretty happy with it, but Michael decides to mulligan. As you can tell, he's playing primarily a Golgari deck with Splash Rakdos, so he needs the cards to be fairly quick in order to be able to pace my deck well. He takes a look at his 6 and is happy, goes ahead and plays a Rakdos Cackler Unleashed on turn 1, and then passes back the turn to me. I draw on a mountain, which is good because I had no red sources, and I pass back the turn. He goes ahead and swings at me for 2, taking me down to 18, passes to me. I play a Swamp, then I go ahead and play my Grim Roustabout, and I do unleash it. So it's now a 2/2 regenerate that can't block. Pass back the turn to Michael. He plays another forest, swings at me for 2, taking me to 16. Then he plays the Stonefair Crocodile and passes. I play another Swamp. Then I have a couple of options: Splatter Thug. I could play the Rakdos Shred Freak. The other stuff in my hand is cost prohibitive, so the best option at this point, after I swing to leave mana up for regeneration, taking Michael to 18, I go ahead and play Splatter Thug with no Unleash so that I can kill either of his creatures if he decides to attack in, since my guy has first strike. Michael plays a Rakdos Guildgate and then passes the turn back to me. I draw a Swamp, then play it. Then I have a couple of options here. I've got a Rakdos Shred Freak, or I could leave the mana open for Launch Party, depending on what he decides to respond with. I don't have enough mana to play Annihilating Fire, as it requires 2 red and a colorless. The Rakdos Rage Mutt I am 1 mana away from. So I play the Rakdos Shred Freak, leaving 2 mana open in case I need to regenerate the Grim Roustabout, and swing in with the team. Michael decides to take it to go to 12, then pass the turn to him. He plays a mountain. He then plays a Spawn of Rixmati, 5 cost, and he does unleash it, making it a 6/4, and he decides to swing at me for 5, taking me down to 11. He then passes the turn back to me. So I've got to take this new big guy in consideration. I drop another Swamp. Then I've got a couple of options, Launch Party and or the Rakdos Rage Mutt. Technically both sort of provide options with what I can do here. So I decide to pay 5 and play the Rakdos Rage Mutt, giving me a pretty full board, and I pass back to him, basically making it harder for him to swing in, because I've got the 3/3 lifelengthener and plenty of power on the board to help him. He plays a Golgari Guildgate and then pays 5 mana for the 3/4 Hexproofer, trying to basically increase his board. He then decides to swing in with the Spawn of Rixmati, and basically, I've got to decide if I want to trade up with 2 of the creatures, if I want to take 6. Then as we're talking, he decides he wants to swing in with the Rakdos Cackler as well. I decide to block with the Splatter Thug on the Rakdos Cackler, and then throw, chumping my Rakdos Shred Freak in front of his Spawn of Rixmati. He then passes the turn back to me. I draw into another Splatter Thug. So at this point I can play Launch Party and or another Splatter Thug, but I decide to pass the turn back to him. He draws, and then decides to play Underworld Connections. It costs 3, it's an enchantment, you put it on a land. You can then tap that land, pay 1 life to draw a card. So he pays that, and then decides to swing in with his Spawn of Rixmati. I go ahead and look at my options, then decide to launch party my Grim Roustabout for his spawn, and which takes him down to 10. He then passes the turn back to me. I draw a mountain. I then have a couple of options because I have the Chaos Imps, the Annihilating Fire, and Splatter Thug. I already have some decent power on the board, so really could go any of the ways. Chaos Imps is obviously the strongest of the cards. His deck does not have a lot of answers for flyers, so I decide to pay all 6 and play the Chaos Imps. He, in response, uses Underworld Connections at the end of my turn to pay 1 life to draw a card. He then draws his normal card for the turn. He's basically trying to find answers before he loses because of Chaos Imps. He then pays 4 for the Sluiceway Scorpion and passes the turn back to me. I draw into a Shred Freak, so at this point I have Shred Freak, Annihilating Fire. I go ahead and swing in. He takes 1, takes him down to 2, and then I go ahead and play Annihilating Fire, winning me game 3 and the first round. Round 2 begins. It's William versus Phil. I'm William, of course. We go ahead and count out 7 cards to see if there are to our liking. Phil won the dice roll, so he goes first, or at least he chose to go first. I'm pretty happy with my cards. As you can see, I've got Swamp, Mountain, Grim Roustabout, Rakdos Shred Freak, the Rakdos Keyrune. He plays the, I forget the name, but it's a 1/1 flyer. He can sack to counter a spell unless the other player plays 1. And it's specifically an instant or sorcery spell. So I play a second mana, and then I'm just debating on which spell I want to use. I go ahead and choose the Grim Roustabout with Unleash, so he's a 2/2, can't block with Regenerate. I then pass the turn back to Phil. He goes ahead and swings for 1 in the air. At this point, I already have a feeling he's probably got mostly a flying deck. This kind of bumps it up because he plays the Fairy Imposter that is a 2/1 flyer. You have to return a creature to your hand. Pretty good with a 1/1, so he returns the 1/1 to his hand, then plays it again. So he's got 2 flyers in play. I go ahead and swing in with my 2/2 Regenerate. Phil takes it, going to 18. Always leaving mana up, to play things pre or post combat. In this case, a Rakdos Keyrune to help me ramp and to give me better board state in late game when I don't have as many things to do with my mana. Given that Rakdos decks are typically faster than most, I play back to him. He plays a Plains, but I guess takes it back. He decides he wants to swing first, taking me down to 16. He then plays the Plains and pays 3. This is the enchantment that he can prevent damage by tapping the land, and he also gets a 2/2 Vigilance, a 2/2 Vigilance Knight, which he represents by the dice that you can see on the screen. I play a mountain. Then I've got several options. Splatter Thug. I go ahead and swing for 2, taking Phil to 16. I then play Electrickery with Overload. which deals 1 damage to each creature I don't control. So his 2 flyers that have 1 toughness each, it's a way to go ahead and instantly kill them when he doesn't have mana up for any kind of counter spell. Mainly because I don't know if he's playing with any. Then I go ahead and play an additional 2 for a Rakdos Shred Freak. Should have played pre-combat, but I guess I was also leaving up the ability to regenerate. But I pass back the turn, and Phil plays another island. He then first, he has a token on top of his library. It was a bit strange. But then he swings at me for 2, taking me to 14 with his 2/2 Vigilance Knight token. Passes the turn back to me. I draw another Splatter Thug, so I have 2 in my hand. I'm just kind of doing the math to see what the best use of my mana at the time. I go ahead and swing with both, again leaving up that regeneration mana. He plays, I forget the name, but he's a 2/4 Vigilance Flash. So he go ahead and he drops that guy, and he's only going to block with him. So I go ahead, pay 3 mana, and do an Augur Spree, which kills him. Kills the 2/4, it gives him +4/-4. And that lets 2 go through, taking Phil to 15. I then pass back the turn. Oh, and it was 15 because he prevented 1 of the damage as well. That's important to note, using the enchantment on his land. He then swings at me for 2, taking me to 12. It's a good thing about Vigilance is if I don't have any blockers, he can always do. He casts Inspiration. He draws 2 cards. He plays a Plains, which is his land for the turn, and plays the 1/1 lifelink Cat, and passes the turn back to me. I draw another Rakdos Shred Freak, so I pay 2, play another Rakdos Shred Freak, and swing in with the team. So that's 6 total. He blocks with one of the Nakatals and takes 4, but then he gains 1, which takes him to 12. I then pay 3 to play a Splatter Thug, and I do unleash him. And then I pass the turn back to Phil. At this point, I've got, essentially 9 power on the board. If I activate the key rune, actually that would make 10 power. Phil plays the Seller of Songbirds, which is a little 1/2 creature that creates a 1/1 flying bird token. He then passes the turn back to me. I decide to swing in with the team, at least with the normal creatures that I have, and see what he does there. So he blocks a 1/2. At first he decides to block with both his 1/1 and his 2/2, but I remind him that it's first strike. This is a friendly game. Normally, you wouldn't have to take that back, but I told him that. He decides to not block there to not lose both of his creatures since mine has first strike. So we trade there. He takes 4 after preventing 1 of the damage, taking him to 8. I then play another Splatter Thug, and I unleash that as well. Passing the turn. Phil's got a lot of lands to untap there. He go ahead and swings at me with the 2/2 Vigilance, one of his dice tokens there, taking me down to 10. It's a good thing about Vigilance is he's keeping it back to block and so forth. He then passes the turn back to me. Looks like I draw into a land, which I go ahead and play. And I decide to swing with the team again. He chumps and decides to chump on both and prevent 1 damage, which takes him down to 7, and he loses both of his creatures. I then pay 6 for Chaos Imps, and as you can see, he decides to counter and gain 5 life. It's a pretty good counter because that Chaos Imps is definitely doing a lot of work for me. It's a pretty powerful creature in limited, and it fits my deck pretty well. He draws and passes the turn. I then decide to pay the 2 to activate the key rune, and just decide to swing in with the entire team. At this point, he's got to have some sort of response. There's no way he can take this much damage. So he flashes in the 3/4 flying flash, which would kill one of my splatter thugs, and essentially taking him down to 7 damage, total, taking him down to 5 from that. That also leaves him up with a 3/4 flyer, which is good against my deck. It's it stops the splatter thug, it stops the key rune, it stops most of the fast-paced creatures in my deck. So it was a good draw for him. He goes ahead and pays 3 for a Vassal Soul, a 2/2 flyer. It's good to fill his board. He goes ahead and also plays the Stealer of Secrets, so that if he can get in there, he can draw a card. Again, another 2/2. I go ahead and draw, and it's a Mind Rot, which I go ahead and pay and use. He discards 2 cards. He only has 1 card in his hand, and it happens to be Archon of the Triumvirate, which is pretty awesome because that could have lost me the game. From there, I go ahead and activate the key rune and swing in with the team. He chooses to block everything except my Unleash Splatter Thug, taking him down to 2. And we both trade 1 creature, and I lose 1 creature. Basically giving him, actually I lose 2 creatures, he loses 1. He swings at me for 2, taking me down to 8, and he draws a card. He pays 2 for the, I think it's called a Searing Apparition. It's a 2/2 he can sack to destroy target enchantment. And he plays another Vassal Soul, so as you can see, I might have misplayed, as he has quite the board advantage on me at this point. And I draw into another land and concede the game. So that takes us into game 2. I decide I want to play first. Looking over my hand, I'm cool with it. Phil's cool with his, so I play a mountain and pass. He plays a plains and passes. I draw, play a swamp, play my good old trusty Grim Roustabout. And I do Unleash, making him a 2/2 that can't block. Phil draws, plays a island, and plays the, I think it's called Searing Apparition. It's a 2/2. I then swing with the Grim Roustabout, taking him down to 18 as he doesn't block. Then I play a Splatter Thug, and I do Unleash, making it a 3/3 first strike, can't block. Phil plays a land, and he swings. I don't know what he has, or if he doesn't realize what I've got, so I don't block. So I go down to 18. He then plays the land that allows him to prevent damage and gives him a 2/2 vigilance. Or plays the enchantment on a land, yeah. And passes the turn back to me. At this point, I go ahead and swing with both. Again, this is to leave up regeneration mana in case he decides he wants to block, I would keep my creature and he wouldn't keep his. I then play another Splatter Thug and do Unleash. Oh, which reminds me, that's why he was fine attacking in. It's because my Splatter Thug was unleashed, therefore can't block. So that's why he did. And Phil's at 18 or 13 at this point. I'm at 18. Phil then plays an inaction injunction on one of my Splatter Thugs. At first, I just use this orange die to denote the fact that it's detained. Then I decide I can actually come up with a little crafty, I'll actually just write detain on a sheet of paper and put it on that way because I have a feeling since he has that card that I might have to use it in the future. So I just go ahead and do that so we remember. He then plays his little 1/1 flyer and swings at me for 4, taking me down to 14. He then passes the turn back. I draw into a Rakdos Shred Freak. So I have, a few cards in my hand. I have an Ash Zealot, I have a Launch Party, another Rakdos Shred Freak, and a Chaos Imps. At this point, obviously, I would like more land so that I could accelerate into the Chaos Imps a little better. But I play the Shred Freak and decide to attack with the 3 creatures that aren't detained. So 2 power, 3 power, and 2 power respectively. And not enough to regenerate. So he's deciding at this point whether he wants to chump or he wants to trade, because he can trade with the Shred Freak essentially. Essentially, if he does, he would take 5, which is what he decides to do. He figures it's more of a value out of what creatures he has. So he goes to 8, and again I'm at 14. And then I pass back the turn to him. Most Rakdos decks, you're okay if you miss a land drop if it's mid-game. At this point, I would love to have another mana up for Launch Party if I need it. But, there's always the next turn. Phil thinking about his options, he decides to swing at me with the 2/2 Vigilance, since he can keep it back as a blocker, taking me to 12. He then pays for a Vassal Soul to give him a 2/2 flyer, and passes the turn. I draw into a Vinoshino Racketeer, yet another non-land card. But at this point, at least it gives me card draw, so if I decide I want to drop something, at this point I probably want to discard a Rakdos Shred Freak. At least it gives me that option. So again, I swing with the team, leaving up regeneration mana if he decides he wants to trade with my Grim Roustabout. At least it gives me options, but not him since he's tapped out. He decides to, he takes 2 and chumps, and then I play 3 for my Vinoshino Racketeer, which when it comes into play, it allows me to discard a card. If I do, I can draw a card. So I draw a card, and it is a mountain. So that makes me hit my land drop. So I'm pretty happy with that play overall. Plays like that allow you to, essentially get in the game and could win you the game just from the cards that you draw. Card draw is very important. He plays the 1/1 Lifelink Cat and passes the turn. I play an Ash Zealot, which is a 2/2 first strike. And we go over the options because essentially it's 7 damage, but he's got the land, he can prevent 1, and he trades with the cat, which gains him 1 life. So it takes him down to 1. I then pass the turn back to him, but he's at this point got no creatures on the board and has to deal with 4. So he concedes, winning me game 2. And that takes us to game 3 in round 2. Phil decides he would like to play first. We're looking over our hands. I decide I'm going to keep. It was kind of tough for me just because in game 3 it's not always the easiest. But I draw into a great 2-drop. I decide to drop a mountain, and as you can see, I've got a Splatter Thug, I've got a Rakdos Rage Mutt, I've got a decent enough curve that I think it might work out for me. He plays this Pegasus. He's a 1/3 flyer, which unfortunately is a very good blocker for my creatures. So I pay 2 with my first strike, haster, and I do not attack since he's got kind of the perfect blocker for my guy right now. But I pass the turn back to him. He then pays 2. I forget the name of the enchantment, but essentially it causes, at the beginning of my upkeep, I have to pay 2, or the converted mana cost of that card, in order to not sacrifice it. So I'm not going to pay 2 every turn, not in this deck, to keep that card, especially when he's got the flyer, and I've got a Rakdos Kirun, Chaos Imps, and 2 Splatter Thugs. The Ash Zealot was just a good starter. It was not the best card in my hand at the time. I'm trying to accelerate into Chaos Imps so I can storm him over. Phil's got a lot of flyers, but he doesn't have anything as big as Chaos Imps, other than the Archon, which I only saw once and was countered. So he then plays Stealer of Secrets and passes the turn. At this point I have 5 mana. Essentially I can either play the Rakdos Rage Mud, or which I do. It has lifelink and haste, so I go ahead and swing. It's whether or not he decides to block, which he does not, taking him down to 17 and me up to 22. And pass the turn. At this point I only need 1 more mana to play the Chaos Imps, or I could play 2 Splatter Thugs Unleashed, or, you know, I've got some good options at this point. Options that will help me win the race. Here's where the detain counter comes in handy again. He uses another inaction injunction, and to do that, he decides to swing at me with both, taking me down to 19, and he gets to draw a card off of Stealer of Secrets. And he plays the little 1/1 flyer. That it's sort of like a mana leak. He can sacrifice it to counter an instant or sorcery spell unless the controller pays 1 mana. He then passes the turn back to me. I draw an Augur Spree. I go ahead and pay... see, I've got a couple of options. I could play 2 Splatter Thugs. I could play a Splatter Thug and leave 1 up for, or 3 up for an Augur Spree. But I decided to go ahead and play the Chaos Imps while he doesn't have mana up to counter it. And he's sort of, you know, he's eyeing it. I'm telling him about the fact that it's a 6/5 flying, that sort of thing. I then pass the turn back to him. I didn't unleash it. I essentially have options that, you know, I'm leaving it up so that he can't swing at me for anything, but it's still a very powerful card to swing at him at. In retrospect, I probably should have unleashed, but anyways, he dramatic rescues, which sends it back to my hand, and he gains 2 life, putting him up to 19. He then swings at me with both of his flyers, taking me down to 17. Good way to get in a little bit of extra damage on his end. He then plays Seller of Songbirds, which creates a 1/1 flying bird token when it comes into play. He then, as I swing in with the Rage Mutt, he decides to chump and trade. I still gain 3 life, going to 20. I then pay 6 for the Chaos Imps again. And once again, he doesn't have mana up for counters. So I decide it's a pretty good time. Again, I don't unleash, but maybe I should have. But he does have 3 flyers, so. He then plays Inspiration on himself, allowing him to draw 2 cards. Again, trying to find a solution, as he knows the clock when I have a Chaos Imps in play, that clock is severely shortened, as his only options are chump blockers and the Archon that he has, who knows how deep in his deck. He goes ahead and plays the 1/1 lifelink cat and passes the turn back to me. So I decide to play a Viashino Racketeers and discard the Grim Roustabout, as it's basically I'm looking for any kind of burn, and I draw into an explosive impact. It's a kind of finisher so that if I need it as removal, it can. If I just need that last 5 points of damage, it's great for that. It's also instant. So I was looking for cards like that or Annihilating Fire. So great value. I decided to swing with the Chaos Imps, and he chumps, as I assumed he would. I then have I have 3 mana open. I could have saved it for an Augur Spree, but I decided to go ahead and play a Splatter Thug, and I do Unleash. I'm trying to build a board presence so that I can swing in for significant damage while causing him to either chump with creatures, trying to double up or triple up and trade, basically make hasty decisions that lead potentially to a win. Phil then taps some mana, and as you can see, he's pretty distraught. He's thinking about his options because he's got to deal with that large of a flyer. But he decides to play the Searing Apparition, the 2/2, probably to help deal with what I've got on the ground, that sort of thing. And in case I've got any kind of enchantments, but this being a Rakdos super aggro deck. But again, I have no idea what he has in his hand, or at least I didn't during the game. So I'm just guessing. I decide to swing in with the Chaos Imps and the Splatter Thug, so he's weighing up his options there. He decides to chump and chump, again just giving me a better board state, and I've still got cards in my hand. I then pay 3 for another Splatter Thug, and I do Unleash, but he counters it with the spell that also gains him 5 life, which is a great draw, and brings him up to 24. I then pass the turn back to him. I'm leaving mana up for Augur Spree in case he tries to attack in with something, or if he plays a better creature. I've at least got that option. As you can see from this shot, he's actually got the land enchantment, which allows him to prevent damage and gives him a 2/2. It's another body on the ground, so that is one option, if not the best option for the current board state for him. He then passes the turn back to me. And I draw into a Mind Rod. I ask him if he has any cards in his hand, but he doesn't, so Mind Rod is completely useless at this point. I then go ahead and pay 6 to Explosive Impact his 1/3 Flying Pegasus, giving him no air support, and then I swing in with the team. So it's a 3/3 first strike, a 2/1, and a 6/5 flyer that he currently has no way of blocking. He then decides to go ahead and take 9. And he gains 1 from the lifelink trade, so it takes him to 16. Then I pass back the turn. As you can see in my hand, I've got an Augur Spree and a Mind Rot. He then passes back to me. Assumedly, he has some sort of flash or flash creature or a counter spell. So. He reminds me that the Viashino Racketeer died. I completely missed it because it was a 2/1, that he blocked with his 1/1 lifelinker. No harm done, though. But again, I decide to swing in with both. He chumps on the... he chumps with his 2/2. He prevents 1, but he takes 5, taking him down to 11. And then at this point, all my cards are, I've got an Augur Spree and an Annihilating Fire, so I go ahead and pass back the turn to him. He passes back to me again, kind of that back and forth. I draw into a Rakdos Shred Freak, so I go ahead and pay 2 and cast it. And at this point, with all of that power on the board, he concedes. And that takes me to the finals.
Oh, there's
Round 3 is me, William, versus Nick. And he didn't like his hand. I did like my hand of 7, so he's going down to 6. I won the roll, so I will be going first. In a Rakdos deck, you pretty much always want to go first. Just you're trying to outrace them, so that first turn lead is can be crucial in some games. I play a swamp. He plays a swamp. Then it's my turn again. I play a mountain, and I go ahead and play a Grim Roustabout, and I do unleash it. And pass back the turn. He plays a Plains and Dagger Drone Imp, the 1/1 flying lifelinker. I go ahead and swing in. He takes 2, going to 18. I then pay 3 for the Rakdos Keyrune. Again, it's a great attacker. That 3/1 first striker is great when I've got the mana up for it, but it's also an accelerant. He swings in with his Imp, taking me to 19 and bumping him back up to 19. He then he missed his land drop, but he has another Imp and passes the turn. I draw into an Ash Zealot. As you can see, I've got the land for it, so I'm kind of debating my options here. So I drop an Ash Zealot. I then use the 1 and then the 1 off the Keyrune to play a Rakdos Shred Freak. So now I've got 6 power on the board. I go ahead and swing, taking him to 13. I then pass the turn. At this point, he is pretty stuck on land. He swings in for 2, taking me to 17. He goes up to 15. He then pays 2 to ultimate price my Ash Zealot. And ultimate price is destroy target monocolored creature. So, for example, it doesn't work on my Rakdos Shred Freak. I go ahead and pay 4 mana and play 2 more Shred Freaks. That's 8 power on the board, swinging and taking Nick down to 7. He draws and finally draws another land, so that's his. He finally hits his land drop. He then pays 3 for a Centaur Healer. It's a 3/3, but he also gains 3 life, so it takes him back up to 10. He then swings at me with his Imps, taking me to 15 and bumping him back up to 12. As you can see, he's got some weird kind of life gain deck going on, essentially working in 3 colors. So I then go ahead and decide to swing in with the team. He decides to block and kill one of my Shred Freaks, but he does go down to 6. I was essentially fine throwing them away because they're, mediocre cards. I then play Hellhole Flailer and do Unleash. It's a pretty powerful. At this point, it's a 4/3 for 3 that I can also pay 4 and sack it to throw it directly in his face. That's a good game finisher in some cases. Just depending on board state or depending how they block when you attack with him, or if they try to tricky removal, you can use the mana there. He swings with his Imps again, taking me down to 13 and him up to 8, and passes the turn. Oh, and he played the Sluiceway Scorpion, the 2/2 Death Touch with Scavenge. At this point, I've got a pretty optimal board state. I decide to swing in. He's only at 8. He doesn't have any of his life linkers up as blockers. So essentially, they're almost no way I can lose this interaction. He decides to block in the most obvious places. I go ahead and sack the Hellhole Flailer to do 4 to his face, and 4 leaks over, winning me game 1.
That was fucking brutal.
Game 2, he decides to go first, so we cut and then deal cards to, see if it's to our liking. Unfortunately, I have to mulligan for the first time of the night. I've got 1 land and then some 3 cost spells and above, which in this deck just doesn't work. Some really good stuff. It's just I can't depend on having to draw land in order to play anything with how fast this deck is supposed to play. He decides to mulligan as well, so it works out in my favor. So we'll see how 6 fares.
But he is also good with the so many of the walls in this set.
Right away I can tell it's going to be pretty good. I've got 3 lands, an Annihilating Fire, a Grim Roustabout, and a Splatter Thug. That's exactly the kind of hand I want to see from the start, but Nick unfortunately does not like his, so he goes to 5.
Let's see if I can get 5 out.
For some, 5 is a lucky number. There are 5 colors of magic.
So I'll play a card.
And we'll see if he likes his 5 hand, which he does, and he plays a forest. I play a swamp and pass back. Unfortunately, I don't have any actual 1-drops in this deck. I've only got the Electrickery, which is a 1-cost spell. He then plays the Selesnya Guildmage, which for 6 allows him to create a Centaur token, but for 4 allows him to populate. And like all the Guildmages, he's a 2/2. I then pay 2 for Grim Roustabout, and I do Unleash. And pass back the turn. I'm essentially trying to outrace his Guildmage's abilities. Either outrace or I do have the Annihilating Fire that I can kill it if I need to. He then plays the Centaur Healer, which is a 3/3 and gains him 3 life, taking him to 23 early in the game. And he passes the turn. I draw into a mountain, and at this point I can either Annihilating Fire something or I can play the Splatter Thug Unleashed. At this point it doesn't make sense to attack him with a Grim Roustabout as he's got a 3/3 and I would be forced to regenerate, so that would be a pretty dumb move anyways. So I play the Splatter Thug with Unleash as a 3/3 first striker. He is a threat to his current board state as the obviously the 3/3 Centaur that he either has now or the token he would create does lose in that sort of battle matchup. I draw into a Spawn of Rixmati. Can't play at the moment, but it gives me something to play on the next turn when I get the land. I do decide to go ahead and swing in with the Splatter Thug, just the Splatter Thug, and taking Nick down to 20. He then does Avenging Arrow on the Splatter Thug, which I then decide to launch party. So I sacrifice my Splatter Thug in response to kill his Guildmage, and he loses 2 life, taking Nick down to 18. That's one reason why it's good to do, to save that mana for post-combat, unless it specifically affects combat in those situations. Nick then decides to swing at me with his 3/3, taking me down to 17. And he passes the turn back. I then play a mountain. I swing at him for 2, taking him to 16. And I pay 5 for the Spawn of Rixmati, which I do unleash. So at this point it's a 6/4 that cannot block. Kind of puts the pressure on him at this point, because if he swings in at me, even though I can't block, he doesn't have, as good of blockers at this point. He then plays the Prismatic Lantern, which allows him, not only can the artifact itself produce mana, but all of his lands can now produce mana of any color. It might not be a great draw this late in the game, or with my board presence, but it's alright. I then play Annihilating Fire, 3 damage to his Centaur. He taps 2 mana thinking he can do something, but obviously he takes it back as it wouldn't work. I then swing at him for 8, taking him down to 8. And pass the turn. Essentially at this point he's looking for, some way to either change my board position or fix his He's in a pretty tough spot overall. That being said, he pays 2 for ultimate price to kill the Grim Roustabout, but he forgot that I can regenerate it. I do have the mana up for regenerate, and therefore he concedes. I win game 2, round 3, and I get first place for the night.